High above Earth, something watched from the darkness of space. The massive ship hung there like a sleeping giant, its metal surface reflecting nothing. Inside, tall figures with gray skin moved through corridors that glowed with soft blue light. Commander Keth stood before a huge window, looking down at the small blue planet below. His long fingers tapped against the glass as he studied the swirling white clouds. To him, Earth looked just like any other world his people had visited before. Another simple conquest, he said to himself. Behind him, his crew worked at strange devices that hummed and beeped. Numbers and symbols flowed across their screens like waterfalls of light. They had been watching Earth for months now, learning about the creatures that lived there. "Sir," called out one of his officers, "we have completed our study of the humans." Keth turned around, his dark eyes curious. "Tell me what you found." The officer touched his screen, and images of humans appeared in the air like magic. People walking, working, playing, children laughing in playgrounds, families eating together. "They are divided into many groups," the officer explained. "Different countries, different beliefs, different languages. They fight each other often. Their technology is basic. They have not even left their own star system." Keth nodded slowly. This was exactly what he expected. His people had done this same thing 47 times before. The pattern was always the same. "Show me their weaknesses," Keth ordered. More images appeared. This time they showed human parents with their children, mothers holding babies, fathers teaching their sons to ride bikes, families at parks and beaches. "They are extremely attached to their offspring," the officer said. "Much more than most species we have encountered." A thin smile crossed Keth's face. Perfect. This made everything so much easier. For over 1,000 years, his people had been expanding across the galaxy. They did not destroy planets or kill entire populations. That was wasteful and messy. Instead, they used a much simpler method. They took the children. It worked every time. When faced with the safety of their young, even the most warlike species would surrender completely. Parents would give up everything to protect their offspring. It was a universal truth that had never failed them. "Prepare the collection teams," Keth commanded. "We will take samples from 3 different locations. This will show them we can strike anywhere at any time." His crew moved quickly to prepare. They activated their transport beams and studied maps of Earth. They chose their targets carefully, places where many human children gathered during the day. Meanwhile, far below on Earth, it was just another ordinary Tuesday morning. In the city of Denver, children ran across a playground, their voices filled with joy. They climbed on swings and slides, completely unaware of the eyes watching them from space. Their teacher, Mrs. Johnson, sat on a bench reading a book while keeping one eye on her students. 8-year-old Tommy was showing his friend how to throw a baseball when the air around them began to shimmer like heat waves on hot pavement. The other children stopped playing and stared at the strange sight. "What's that weird light?" asked his friend Lisa. Before anyone could answer, beams of silver, light shot down from the sky. 6 children, including Tommy and Lisa, suddenly found themselves surrounded by the glowing energy. They tried to run, but their feet wouldn't move. It was like being stuck in thick honey. Mrs. Johnson dropped her book and ran toward them, screaming their names. But in the blink of an eye, the children were gone. Only empty space remained where they had been standing. At the exact same moment, the same thing happened in 2 other places around the world. In Tokyo, children were eating lunch outside their school when the silver beams appeared. 4 of them vanished while their classmates watched in horror. In Berlin, a youth group was hiking in the woods when 8 more children disappeared into beams of light that came from nowhere. Within minutes, 18 human children had been taken from Earth. Aboard the alien ship, Keth watched as the human children appeared in holding cells. The rooms were comfortable, with soft beds and gentle lighting. His people were not cruel. They simply did what was necessary. The children looked around their new surroundings with wide, frightened eyes. Some began to cry. Others hugged each other for comfort. But one boy, the one called Tommy, walked to the wall and pressed his hand against it. "This isn't real," Tommy said quietly. "This has to be some kind of dream." But it wasn't a dream. It was very, very real. Keth felt satisfied with the operations. Success. Now came the easy part. He would contact the human leaders and offer them a simple choice: surrender their planet peacefully or never see their children again. He had done this speech so many times before that he knew it by heart. Usually, the local leaders would beg and plead for a few hours, but they always gave in. Parents were predictable that way. "Open communications to Earth," he ordered. His communications officer began working at his station, but something strange happened. Instead of reaching just one human leader, their signal was picked up by every government on the planet at once. Even stranger was the response they received. It wasn't crying or begging. It wasn't fear or panic. It was something Keth had never heard before in all his years of conquest. The message came from every human nation simultaneously, spoken in dozens of different languages, but all saying the exact same thing. "You have made a mistake. Return our children now or face the consequences." Keth stared at the communication device, confused. This wasn't how other species had responded. Where were the tears? Where were the desperate pleas for mercy? "Sir," his officer said nervously, "I'm detecting massive activity across the entire planet. It appears every human government has gone to emergency status." "Emergency status?" Keth repeated. "What kind of emergency status?" The officer's face went pale as he read his instruments. "The kind they use for war, sir. Global war." For the first time in his long career, Commander Keth felt a small seed of worry growing in his chest. He had expected the humans to react like all the others, with fear, desperation, and quick surrender. Instead, it seemed like he had just awakened, something that had been sleeping, something that was now very, very angry. Down on Earth, in governments around the world, emergency meetings were being held. Military leaders were being called from their beds. Scientists were rushing to their laboratories. And millions of parents were asking the same question: how do we get our children back? But this question was quickly followed by another, more dangerous one. And what do we do to the ones who took them? As night fell over Earth, the planet began to change. Lights stayed on in buildings that were usually dark. Radio signals flew back and forth between countries that hadn't spoken to each other in years. Assembly lines that made cars and computers began retooling to make something else entirely. The humans were organizing. And for the first time in 1,000 years of conquest, Commander Keth wondered if his people had finally chosen the wrong species to threaten. The children were safe for now, but something told him that might not last very long. Earth was no longer quiet and peaceful. Earth was preparing for war. 24 hours had passed since the children vanished, and Earth looked like a completely different planet. In Washington, the president sat in the Situation Room with advisors from every department. Maps covered every wall, showing military bases, satellite positions, and communication networks. But this wasn't just happening in America. In London, Moscow, Beijing, Delhi, and every other capital city around the world, the exact same meetings were taking place. "Status report," the president said, his voice tired but determined. General Williams stood up, pointing to a massive screen. "Sir, we've never seen anything like this in human history. Every nation on Earth has activated their emergency protocols. Countries that haven't spoken to each other in decades are now sharing their most secret information." The screen showed something incredible. Red lines connected every major city on the planet, representing communication channels that had been opened in just one day. Former enemies were working together. Competing companies were sharing technology. Scientists were collaborating across borders without asking for payment. The Russians have given us access to their deep space tracking systems, continued the general. The Chinese have opened their satellite network. The Europeans are sharing their particle research. Everyone is contributing everything they have. But it wasn't just governments that were responding. Regular people everywhere had dropped their normal lives to help. In Houston, NASA engineers who had been retired for years came back to work without being asked. They rolled up their sleeves and started designing rockets that could reach farther than anything humans had ever built before. In Silicon Valley, computer programmers worked around the clock, creating new software to track alien signals. Coffee shops brought them free food. Nobody asked for overtime pay. Nobody complained about being tired. Across America, Europe, Asia, and every continent, the same thing was happening. Factories that made cars suddenly started making different things. Assembly lines that produced phones began producing communication devices designed to reach space. Welders, electricians, and construction workers showed up at military bases, volunteering to help build whatever was needed. Meanwhile, up in space, Commander Keth was getting more confused by the hour. "Show me what they're doing now," he ordered his crew. The main screen lit up with images of Earth, and what Keth saw made no sense to him. Instead of panicking crowds or desperate leaders begging for mercy, he saw something else entirely. Rocket launch pads that had been empty for years suddenly had new rockets being assembled on them. Warehouses across the planet were working day and night, producing equipment at impossible speeds. Radio telescopes that normally looked for distant stars had all turned toward his ship. "Sir," his communication officer said nervously, "I'm picking up massive amounts of radio traffic from the planet. They're not just talking to each other, they're trying to talk to us." "What are they saying?" Keth asked. "The same message, over and over, in hundreds of different languages. Return the children, and we might let you leave." Keth's confidence began to crack. This wasn't how conquests were supposed to work. Other species had always responded with fear and desperate bargaining. They offered resources, territory, anything to get their offspring back safely. But humans seemed to be doing something else entirely. They were preparing for battle. "Pull up our files on similar species," Keth commanded. His officer's fingers moved quickly across his control panel. Data flowed across the screen, showing information about the other 47 worlds they had conquered using the same method. "All previous species responded within 12 hours with surrender offers," the officer reported. "The longest holdout was the Kretari, who lasted 18 hours before giving up their entire planet. And the humans? 24 hours, sir, and they're still mobilizing. On Earth, something truly remarkable was happening in living rooms, offices, and schools everywhere. Parents who had never met each other were organizing on the internet. They created networks of communication that spread faster than wildfire. A mother in Australia whose child hadn't been taken was teaching parents in America how to build communication devices from household items. A father in Norway who worked with satellites was sharing his knowledge with families in Brazil. Grandparents who barely knew how to use computers were learning advanced technology in hours. Dr. Chen, a scientist who had been studying space signals, for 20 years found herself leading a team of the world's smartest people. They had come from everywhere: physicists from Japan, engineers from Germany, computer experts from India, mathematicians from Canada. "We've analyzed the energy signature from when the children were taken," she announced to her team through a video call that included scientists from 50 countries. "We know how their transport system works, and more importantly, we know how to track it." On the screen behind her, complex equations showed the path the alien ship had taken. It was still in Earth's solar system, hiding behind the moon. But the most amazing thing happening on Earth wasn't in government buildings or research labs. It was in ordinary homes and neighborhoods. In Denver, Mrs. Johnson, the teacher who had watched her students disappear, hadn't slept since it happened. She had turned her classroom into a command center, coordinating with other teachers whose students had been taken. Parents brought her food and coffee. Strangers stopped by to ask how they could help. "We're going to get them back," she said to a group of worried parents. "All of them. I don't care what it takes." Similar scenes were playing out around the world. In Tokyo, the principal of the school where children had vanished was working with parents to organize supply lines. In Berlin, the hiking group leader had become the coordinator for hundreds of volunteers who were building equipment in their garages. But perhaps the most impressive thing was happening in the halls of the United Nations. Diplomats who had spent years arguing about borders and trade deals were now working together with one single goal. Admiral Rodriguez, who had been chosen to lead the global response, stood before representatives from every nation on Earth. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, 24 hours ago we were citizens of different countries. Today, we are parents of the same species. Our children have been taken, and we will get them back." The response was immediate and unanimous. Every hand in the room went up in support. Every nation pledged their resources. Every military on Earth placed themselves under one command structure. "What are our orders?" asked the Chinese representative. "Simple," Admiral Rodriguez replied. "We build the biggest rescue mission in human history. We find those children, and we bring them home." Up on the alien ship, the 18 human children were adapting in ways their captors didn't expect. Tommy, the boy who had been playing baseball when he was taken, had become the unofficial leader of the group. "Listen," he whispered to the others during what seemed to be nighttime in their holding area. "My dad always told me that when you're scared, you should pay attention to everything around you. Notice patterns. Look for weaknesses." The other children nodded. Despite being frightened, they were remarkably calm. They had started watching their alien guards, learning their routines, figuring out how their prison worked. "They bring food every few hours," observed Lisa, the girl from the playground. "Always the same guard, always at the same time." "And they don't think we're smart enough to understand their technology," added Jake, one of the children from Tokyo. "I heard them talking. They think we're just scared little animals." Tommy smiled grimly. "Then they don't know much about human kids." As the second day began, Earth's transformation accelerated. News reporters around the world were covering the same story from every angle, but they all had the same message. Humanity was united like never before. And Commander Keth was starting to realize that taking human children might have been the biggest mistake his species had ever made. The humans weren't surrendering, they were coming. 3 days after the children disappeared, something incredible happened in Earth's sky. Rockets began launching from every corner of the planet, but these weren't ordinary space missions. In Florida, a massive rocket that had been built in just 2 days roared to life. Inside were 50 volunteers, all parents themselves, flying in a spacecraft that had never been tested. They knew it might not work. They knew they might not come back. But they launched anyway. At the same time, rockets lifted off from Russia, China, India, France, and a dozen other countries. Old satellites that had been floating uselessly in space for years suddenly came back to life, their systems upgraded with new technology that had been invented in just 72 hours. Commander Keth watched this impossible display from his ship and felt something his species rarely experienced: genuine worry. "How many vessels are they launching?" he asked his crew. "Sir, we count over 300 objects heading our way. Some are rockets, some are satellites, and some are... we're not sure what they are." Keth stared at the screen showing dozens of blinking lights rising from Earth's surface. 300? In 3 days? How is that possible? What the aliens didn't understand was that they had awakened something that had been sleeping in humanity for thousands of years. Every parent on Earth felt the same primal drive: protect the children at any cost. In workshops and garages around the world, ordinary people were building extraordinary things. A mechanic in Detroit had figured out how to turn his truck into a weapon that could work in space. A teacher in London had designed a communication system using parts from old radios and television sets. Farmers in Iowa were growing special materials needed for rocket fuel. But the most amazing part was how everyone worked together. Rich and poor, young and old, scientists and construction workers, they all had the same goal. Dr. Chen, who had been studying the alien signals, made a discovery that changed everything. "I've found their weakness," she announced during a video call with military leaders from around the world. "Their shields work by creating an energy barrier around their ship. But if we hit them with the right frequency at exactly the right time, we can break through." "What kind of frequency?" asked Admiral Rodriguez. "The same frequency that human cell phones use, but amplified 1,000,000 times. We need every satellite, every radio tower, and every communication device on Earth to work together at the same moment." The plan was insane. It required perfect timing from millions of devices spread across the entire planet. One mistake, and it wouldn't work. But humans had become very good at doing impossible things when their children were in danger. Meanwhile, aboard the alien ship, Commander Keith was learning things about humans that his species had never bothered to study before. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "I've been analyzing their behavior patterns. Something doesn't match our previous data." "Explain." The officer brought up images of other species they had conquered. "When we took offspring from other worlds, the parents typically became emotional and irrational. They made poor decisions based on fear. And the humans? The humans are becoming more organized, more focused, and more dangerous. Taking their young didn't make them weaker. It made them stronger." Keth felt a chill run down his spine. He accessed his people's historical records, searching for any mention of a species that had reacted this way before. Deep in the archives, he found something that made his blood run cold. It was a report from a Zeltharian scout ship that had visited Earth centuries ago. The report was marked with their highest warning code: extreme danger, avoid at all costs. The report described humans as a species with unusual parental protective instincts and capable of remarkable coordination when their offspring are threatened. The scout had recommended that Earth should never be approached by Zeltharian forces, but that report had been buried in the archives, ignored by commanders who thought they knew better. Now, Keth realized his people had made a terrible mistake. On Earth, the moment everyone had been preparing for finally arrived. In command centers across the globe, countdown clocks showed the same time: 00, 0003, 000002, 000001. "Execute Operation Bring Them Home," Admiral Rodriguez announced. Instantly, every human-made device capable of transmitting a signal activated at once. Cell phone towers, radio stations, television broadcasts, satellite networks, and even garage door openers. They all sent out the same frequency at the exact same moment. The combined signal was like nothing that had ever existed before. It traveled through space as a wave of pure energy, carrying with it the determination of every parent on Earth. Aboard the alien ship, alarms began blaring. "Sir, our shields are fluctuating," the defense officer reported, panic in his voice. "Impossible! Our shields have never failed." "The humans have found our frequency weakness. Their signal is breaking through our defenses." At that moment, the first human spacecraft reached the alien vessel. It was a converted satellite, controlled remotely by a mother in Texas whose daughter had been taken. The satellite wasn't armed with traditional weapons. Instead, it carried something much more dangerous: a recording of every human parent on Earth saying the same thing: "Give us back our children." The message played on repeat as the satellite attached itself to the alien ship's hull. Then another satellite arrived, and another, until dozens of human devices were attached to the vessel, all broadcasting the same demand: Inside the ship, the 18 human children heard the voices of their parents echoing through the walls. Tommy, who had become their leader, smiled for the first time since being taken. "Did you hear that?" he whispered to the others. "That's every mom and dad on Earth. They're here for us." But the children weren't just waiting to be rescued. They had been busy too. For 3 days, they had been studying their prison, learning how the alien technology worked and making their own plans. Jake, the boy from Tokyo, had figured out how to access the ship's communication system by watching the guards. Lisa had discovered that the locks on their cells could be opened if you knew the right sequence, and Tommy had been mapping the ship's layout every time they were moved. "It's time," Tommy said. "They're distracted by the attack. This is our chance." The children put their escape plan into action just as the human fleet launched its main assault. While alarms screamed throughout the alien ship, 18 kids quietly slipped out of their cells and began making their way toward what they hoped was the exit. Commander Keth watched in horror as his ship was surrounded by human vehicles. Some were proper spacecraft. Others were converted satellites, and a few were things he couldn't even identify. But they all had one thing in common. They weren't backing down. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead human vessel," his communication officer announced. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was calm, determined, and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. "This is Captain Johnson of the Earth Defense Force. You have 30 seconds to return our children and surrender your vessel. If you refuse, we will take them back by force." Keth looked around his command center at his frightened crew. For 1,000 years, his people had been the ones making demands. Now, for the first time, they were the ones being threatened. And they were discovering what every parent on Earth already knew. There is no force in the universe more dangerous than someone fighting to protect their children. "Sir," his officer whispered, "what are your orders?" Keth stared at the swarm of human ships surrounding his vessel. Each one represented parents who would rather die than leave their children in alien hands. For the first time in his military career, he was facing an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, bargained with, or scared away. He was facing human parents, and they wanted their kids back. The alien ship shook like it was being hit by a massive earthquake. Lights flickered on and off as human spacecraft attached themselves to the hull like metal parasites. Inside the vessel, Commander Keth could hear the sound of his shields failing, piece by piece. "Report!" he shouted over the noise of alarms. "Sir, they're cutting through our outer hull in 12 different places," his tactical officer called out. Their technology shouldn't be able to do this, but somehow they're making it work. What the aliens didn't understand was that humans had stopped following the rules of what should be possible. When you're fighting to save your children, impossible becomes irrelevant. Outside the ship, Captain Johnson guided her converted space station closer to the alien vessel. Her crew was made up entirely of volunteers, parents, teachers, and grandparents who had never been in space before. They were terrified, but they kept working anyway. "Cutting Torch Team Alpha report," she called into her radio. "We're through." "The first layer," came the reply from a father whose son had been taken from the Denver playground. "These alien metals are tough, but our new plasma cutters are tougher." All around the alien ship, similar scenes were playing out. A team of mothers from Japan had figured out how to override the ship's external sensors. Engineers from Germany were installing human communication devices directly onto the alien hull. Even teenagers who were too young to be official astronauts had snuck aboard support vessels, determined to help rescue the captured children. Inside the ship, chaos was spreading. Alien crew members ran through corridors they had thought were impenetrable just hours before. Many had never experienced combat before. Their species had always won through intimidation, not actual fighting. But the 18 human children were no longer in their cells. Tommy led the group through ventilation shafts they had been secretly mapping for days. The ship's layout was confusing, but they had learned to navigate by following the sounds of machinery and the flow of air. There, whispered Lisa, pointing through a grate. That looks like where we came in. Below them, they could see a room filled with strange technology, including what looked like the transport devices that had brought them to the ship in the first place. If we can get down there, maybe we can send a signal to our parents, suggested Jake. Tommy nodded. But first, we need to make sure the aliens can't use those transport things on anyone else ever again. The children had spent 3 days watching their captors, and they had learned something important. The aliens underestimated them completely. The guards thought human children were helpless and stupid. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Meanwhile, Commander Keth was receiving reports that made no sense to his military training. Sir, the humans have somehow synchronized. Their attack with precision our computers say is impossible, his officer reported. They're hitting us at 17 different frequencies simultaneously while coordinating the movements of over 400 spacecraft. 400? Keth repeated in disbelief. Sir, more keep arriving. It appears every human with access to anything that can fly has joined their fleet. Through the ship's sensors, Keth could see the truth of those words. The space around his vessel was filled with an incredible variety of human craft. Professional military ships flew alongside converted civilian satellites. Research stations that had been repurposed as weapons platforms worked together with personal spacecraft built in garage workshops. It was the most chaotic, disorganized, and absolutely terrifying display of determination he had ever witnessed. Sir, another officer interrupted, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're demanding to speak with you directly. Put them through. Admiral Rodriguez's voice filled the command center, calm and absolutely certain. Commander, this is your final warning. Our children are aboard your ship, and we want them back. You have 60 seconds to surrender before we take more direct action. More direct action? Keth couldn't help asking. What could be more direct than this attack? There was a pause. Then Rodriguez replied with words that chilled every alien. On the bridge. Commander, what you're seeing right now is us being polite. You really don't want to find out what happens when human parents stop being polite. At that moment, explosions echoed through the ship as human cutting teams finally breached the hull. Keth watched on his monitors as figures in makeshift space, suits poured into his vessel. Ordinary people who had learned to become warriors in just 4 days. But the most shocking thing wasn't the invasion itself. It was watching how the humans moved through his ship. They didn't advance like a military force. They moved like parents searching for their lost children, which made them infinitely more dangerous. Scanning for human life signs, called out one of the invading humans. Tommy, Lisa, Jake, if you can hear us, we're here. We're coming for you. In the ventilation system above, the children heard those voices, and tears of relief ran down their faces. That's my mom, Lisa whispered excitedly. And my dad, added Jake. Tommy smiled, but he also held up a hand for quiet. Let's finish what we started first. Then we'll surprise them. The children had reached the transport room and were quietly sabotaging the alien technology. They might have been young, but they were also smart, brave, and very, very angry about being kidnapped. Throughout the ship, human rescue teams were advancing with incredible speed. They had studied the vessel's layout using data gathered by their satellites and had planned their assault down to the smallest detail. A group of parents from Berlin moved through one corridor, following energy readings that might lead to the children. Teachers from Tokyo checked every room methodically, refusing to miss even the smallest hiding place. The playground supervisor, Mrs. Johnson, led a team of other educators who treated the rescue like the most important lesson they would ever teach. Remember, she told her team over their radio, we're not just here to get our kids back. We're here to make sure this never happens to anyone else's children either. Commander Keth realized his ship was being overrun by the most motivated fighting force his species had ever encountered. These humans weren't professional soldiers. They were something much more dangerous. They were parents who would do absolutely anything to protect their young. "Sir, recommend we abandon ship," his second-in-command suggested. "Abandon ship?" Keth looked around his command center in disbelief. "This vessel represents centuries of our technological advancement. Sir, with respect, those humans represent something we've never faced before. They're not fighting for conquest or resources. They're fighting for their children. Our tactical computers have no protocols for dealing with that kind of motivation." As if to prove his point, another explosion shook the ship as humans blasted through another section of hull. Over the communication system, they could hear human voices calling out names, searching desperately for their lost children. But the children were no longer lost. Tommy and his friends had successfully sabotaged the transport system and were now making their way toward the sounds of their parents' voices. They moved through the ship like they owned it, no longer frightened prisoners, but determined kids, who were ready to go home. "This way," Tommy whispered, leading the group down a corridor. "I can hear Mrs. Johnson's voice." Behind them, they left the alien transport room filled with sparking, broken equipment that would never steal another child from any world ever again. As the two groups, the rescuing parents and the escaped children, moved toward each other, through the dying alien ship, Commander Keith made a decision that his species would remember for centuries. He activated the ship's surrender beacon. For the first time in 1,000 years of conquest, the Zeltharian Empire was giving up. But as Keth would soon learn, human parents weren't interested in surrender. They were interested in justice. And they were about to teach his species why taking human children was the worst mistake anyone could ever make. 6 months had passed since the day 18 children disappeared from Earth, and the world would never be the same. Tommy stood at the podium in the United Nations building, looking out at representatives from every country on the planet. He was still just 8 years old, but his eyes held experiences that most adults would never have. "We weren't scared," he said into the microphone, his voice clear and strong. "Not really scared anyway, because we knew you would come for us." That's what families do. The entire assembly hall was silent. These were diplomats who had spent years arguing about borders and trade deals. But today, they were just parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, listening to a child who had been through something unimaginable. "We learned things up there," Tommy continued. "We learned that there are other beings out there in space who think they can take children from their families. But we also learned something else. We learned that when you mess with human kids, you mess with all of humanity." Behind him on a massive screen, images showed Earth as it looked now. The planet was covered with new structures that hadn't existed 7 months ago. Space elevators reached up from every continent. Massive orbital stations surrounded the planet like protective guardians. Launch pads dotted the landscape, ready to send rescue ships to any corner of the solar system at a moment's notice. But the most impressive change wasn't visible from space. It was the change in humanity itself. Dr. Chen, who had discovered how to track alien ships, now led the Earth Defense Research Center. Her team included scientists from every nation, working together on projects that would have been impossible before the crisis. "We've developed technology that can detect any spacecraft entering our solar system," she explained during a briefing with world leaders. "But more than that, we've created a network that connects every human colony, outpost, and research station. If anyone, anywhere, is threatened, the entire human species will know about it within minutes." And there were now human colonies throughout the solar system. After the alien crisis, people had realized that spreading humanity across multiple worlds was the best way to protect their children. Colonies on Mars were thriving. Research stations on the moons of Jupiter were expanding. Even the asteroid belt had human settlements, all connected by the fastest communication network ever built. Admiral Rodriguez, who had led the rescue mission, was now the head of the Human Defense Force. Her fleet included ships from every nation on Earth, but they no longer considered themselves citizens of different countries. They were human parents protecting human children. And that was all that mattered. "We've learned to work together in ways we never thought possible," she said during a ceremony honoring the volunteers who had participated in the rescue. 6 months ago, if someone had told me that former enemies would share their most advanced technology to protect each other's children, I would have said it was impossible. Today, it's just Tuesday. The ceremony was taking place at a new memorial, built where the children had first been taken. But it wasn't a sad memorial. It was a celebration of what humanity could accomplish when they worked together. Lisa, one of the children from the playground, had become something of an artist. Her drawings of the rescue mission hung in schools around the world, showing ordinary parents doing extraordinary things to save their kids. "I drew this one," she said, pointing to a picture of rocket ships flying toward a big alien vessel, "because I want everyone to remember that when bad things happen to children, good people come to help." Jake, who had been taken from Tokyo, was learning to speak multiple languages so he could talk to children from other countries. His goal was to make sure kids everywhere knew they were part of one big human family that would always protect them. "Before this happened," he said, "I thought I was just a kid from Japan. Now I know I'm a human kid from Earth, and that means 7 billion people will come to help me if I ever need them." But perhaps the most important changes had happened in the most ordinary places. Mrs. Johnson had returned to her classroom, but now it looked very different. Along with regular subjects like math and reading, her students learned about space technology, alien civilizations, and most importantly, how to work together as a team. "We teach them everything they need to know," she explained to visiting educators from around the world. "But the most important lesson is this: we are all part of the same family, and families take care of each other." Similar changes had happened in schools everywhere. Children learned multiple languages so they could talk to kids from other countries. They studied engineering and space science alongside history and literature. They practiced emergency procedures, not with fear, but with confidence, knowing that their entire species would come to their aid. The alien ship, meanwhile, had been completely taken apart and studied. Every piece of their technology was analyzed, understood, and improved upon. The humans had learned everything the aliens knew about space travel, energy systems, and interstellar communication. Commander Keth was still alive, held in a comfortable facility where human scientists studied not his technology, but his psychology. They wanted to understand how an entire species could make such a fundamental mistake about human nature. "Your people studied our wars, our conflicts, our disagreements," Dr. Chen said during one of their conversations. "But you never studied our love. You never researched what happens when someone threatens our children." Keth had aged considerably in 6 months. His confidence was gone, replaced by a deep understanding of the mistake his species had made. "We thought taking your offspring would make you weak," he admitted. "Every other species became desperate and irrational when we took their young. They made poor decisions based on emotion. And humans? Humans became stronger, more focused, more united. Taking your children didn't divide you. It united you in a way we never expected." Dr. Chen nodded. "You thought love was a weakness. You discovered it's our greatest strength." The conversation was being broadcast throughout space on frequencies that every known alien civilization could receive. It wasn't a threat, it was education. Humanity wanted every species in the galaxy to understand a simple truth: human children were off limits. The message was reinforced by Earth's new space fleet. Hundreds of ships now patrolled the solar system, crewed by volunteers from every nation. They weren't looking for fights, but they were ready for them. Captain Miller, who commanded one of the patrol vessels, explained their mission to new recruits. "We're not here to conquer anyone or take anyone's resources. We're here to make sure no alien species ever again thinks it's safe to threaten human children." And the message was getting through. Across the galaxy, alien civilizations were updating their databases about Earth. The planet that had once been marked as primitive was now labeled with warnings like extreme parental protective instincts and capable of impossible coordination when offspring threatened. Some alien species had even begun to study human behavior, trying to understand how a divided planet could unite so completely and so quickly. They discovered something their own civilizations had never experienced: the power of unconditional love. As the first anniversary of the incident approached, humanity was planning something unprecedented. They were going to launch the largest spacecraft ever built, a colony ship that would carry entire families to a new star system. The ship's name was painted on its side in every human language: Never Again. Tommy, Lisa, Jake, and all the other children who had been rescued were invited to the launch ceremony. As they watched the massive ship prepare to leave Earth, Tommy spoke for all of them. 6 months ago, some aliens thought they could take us away from our families, he said. They thought that would make humans give up. Instead, it made humans remember that we're all one big family. And now, no matter how far we spread across the galaxy, we'll always take care of each other. The colony ship launched into space, carrying thousands of families toward a new world. But they weren't leaving Earth behind. They were extending Earth's family across the stars. And somewhere in the depths of space, other alien civilizations detected the ship's passage and updated their records once more. The entry for humanity now read, "Species capable of extraordinary unity when protecting offspring. Recommend peaceful contact only. Under no circumstances should young humans be threatened." The message was clear, and it would echo across the galaxy for generations. You can negotiate with humans. You can trade with humans. You can even fight humans if you must. But you should never, ever threaten human children. Because if you do, you won't be dealing with individual parents or single nations. You'll be dealing with all of humanity. And that's a fight no one in the universe wants.